Mic check. Now I bet you guys can hear me. How are you doing today? Well, that's gonna kill it. And do I just want to reset it with there? Probably. Okay. There we go. So, what we're looking at is some interesting power rankings. So, things got really interesting this weekend where we discovered lots of fun stuff happened. So first off, Rutgers got two major upsets. That's why you're seeing them in this monster tier up here. They've really been on a tear, just improving. Really since the beginning of last semester, they've been climbing pretty aggressively. Then at the beginning of this semester, they did get TAP switched over from Harrisburg to Rutgers there, and they were this last weekend able to first take down ISU and then take down Maryville. Were there some roster things like maybe players on ISU or Maryville being in the wrong role or someone, not being there because they thought they could win without it? Almost certainly. Those sorts of things happen. That is part of collegiate. Lots of teams were on spring break this week. Some teams will be on spring break next week. That's how this all works. But, when you're looking at collegiate for other sports, you're absolutely considering how good is their bench? Are they usually able to field their players? What do players' injuries look like? Same thing happens with Overwatch. If you troll too much or if you don't have players available, that can mean you're a little less likely to win individual matches, and so you factor that into your power rankings. That said, you'll notice I do my power rankings from left to right here within each tier, so I am still keeping Maryville and ISU in the top two spots here. Is it possible that Rutgers will fall in the future because they can't actually hang once these teams start treating them more seriously? I think that's quite possible. That might even be likely. But for the moment, they have earned this spot. For those of you who are saying, well, hold on, Temporal, that just doesn't make any sense. They should be in the one spot. They got the wins after all. It's not quite that simple because you're going to find that if we look at Rutgers, they do have a loss to Boise. And then you go, okay, well, why don't we just put Boise in the number one spot? Well, we can't do that because Boise took a loss to Harrisburg. Well, why don't we just put Harrisburg in the number one spot? Well, we can't do that because Maryville has beaten Harrisburg. And we know Harrisburg just is not the top team beyond that. But that's fine. We also really know Rutgers probably isn't the top team. Boise probably isn't the top team. Those might be a little bit more in the discussion. Okay. Oh, it's in the. Yeah, I can move my head. Thank you. Thank you. So let's go ahead and continue here because it is fun. Browser wants to update. That's nice. That's nice. It's green, so it doesn't need it very badly now. It'll turn orange or red as it needs it more badly. So we continue through here. There's nothing too wild. I haven't done this, so I'll be a little more thorough in justifying some of these people than I usually am. But Maryville, they've got wins over Harrisburg, St. Thomas, Utah, Cal Berkeley. Not that we need to go that far. They have their loss to Rutgers. ISU has wins against Northwood, Fisher, Ball State, Terps. They have a loss to Rutgers. Northwood has wins against Fisher, UCSD, UW Stout. That's pretty deep. And then Rutgers has wins, of course, against ISU, Maryville, UTD, with losses to Boise this semester. This semester is all we're talking about. We're aware of what happened end of last semester. We're aware of teams with very strong legacies, but we're really deep enough into the semester now to be focusing completely or like 99% completely on what's happened this semester. So then we'll move on to our next tier. These are the teams that we'd look at and say, hey, they could win it all. Most people might look at these and say, hey, they could win it all, but I just don't think we can disrespect Rutgers that hard. Results matter, right? And they got the results this week. Boise, of course, has done quite well. If we look at last semester, we can go, oh, hey, they took down Northwood to win NACE, I want to say, but that's last semester. We don't care about that. This semester, they took down Rutgers, and hey, we can't get that's very real. They also went ahead and got their win against UCSD. They've also lost to UCSD. UCSD is all the way down here. I am sure that will be controversial because UCSD proved that they were a team last semester that could swing in the top 8, maybe the top 12, whatever the case was. They took down Rutgers. They took down Bellevue. They were great on their way through there. They have a win against Boise here. They should be a top team, but they also have some embarrassing losses. So we will circle back to them as we get to them. But, I'm just bringing them up because it's the first time we are mentioning them. Boise also has wins against Toronto, Utah, Ohio State, Kentucky Blue, Illinois Orange. They've got losses to Harrisburg as well as a loss to UCSD. Again, how can you have a loss to UCSD and be all the way up here when UCSD is down here? UCSD is absolutely a wild case, and we will continue to cover it. But the win is more recent for Boise, so we're going to sort of let that be. We continue through. Fisher, we don't have a ton that we're looking at for Fisher here. They've got wins against UCLA, losses against Redbirds, Northwood twice. Nothing too wild there. Fisher does have two teams. If we looked at the second Fisher team, maybe we'd put them here. Maybe we'd put them somewhere in this mess, something like this. I'm really only going to worry about their lead team right now. Their lead team hasn't done anything to trip and drop itself like a team like UCSD has. And sometimes you do have to look at teams and go, they don't have a ton of matches for us to look at this semester. They don't have wins to put them into place, but we are going to, in those cases, look at legacy if they haven't lost any matches that would cause them to drop down. That's going to be the case a little bit with Fisher here. They don't have crazy great wins this semester, but they aren't losing matches that they should be losing either, so they're not dropping. That frequently will apply to teams like UCI, who generally only competes in ABC, in the main tournament here. In fact, we could look at their wins, and their only meaningful win is really going to be over Converse. Hey, that's fine. They don't have any losses. They can sort of maintain a pretty good spot here. Okay. Then we move on and we go to Harrisburg. Harrisburg, we've sort of covered a lot with their win against Boise, St. Clair, UW, that's University of Washington, Oklahoma, and then their loss to Maryville. Could they maybe be a little higher? They could be, but you sort of go, hey, they would have been shifted down initially a bit based on loss of roster strength. Again, Tapp went over to Rutgers there. They did, again, very end of last semester, lose to Rutgers before that happened. And so we sort of look at this and say, okay, that, we expected them to shift down a bit. They haven't lost any matches that they really shouldn't lose at this point, but this is about where they are, and they kind of have the wins to back that up. So we're good with them here. Converse is a little interesting. They started the semester strong. They sort of found ball comp before everyone else did, even before the ball patch. They found ball comp, and it was giving teams a lot of trouble. You could have seen them up in the top 5 with some nice wins. Since then, they've fallen off pretty hard. Their manager will tell you that they have fallen off pretty hard. Now, they're still noticeable. We still have them here, but I think this tier is a pretty flexible tier where people are in this slot. If we look at their actual results, they've got a win over Miami, Ohio, Georgia Tech, Kentucky Blue. None of those are terribly impressive. The most impressive of those is actually probably Georgia Tech down here, but again, we sort of look at that, and that's, if I go back further, I could actually find some more wins. That's not totally fair. They did have some more stuff at the very end, with the ball comp before people found ball comp stuff, but in the last real 2 months, this is about what you'd be looking at, and hey, it's nothing special. They've definitely fallen some. This is about where they go. They did take up a loss, and the loss that's really caused this initial fall was this loss to ASU, who's going to be a newcomer. Most people who have watched my power rankings before are going to go, ASU? What's Arizona State University doing here? Well, Arizona State University now has Angelic, old support player for Path to Poverty or Square One, as they rebranded once they played in Contenders. He was there on Square One for quite a while. That was a competitive mid-tier Contenders competitive team for quite a while, and that's really strengthened that team. That's really become something that's allowed them to play there. St. Clair, about where they would have been last semester, may have risen a little bit based on other teams above them just sort of falling down into the chaos that is down below, that is the what are these teams down here, what's happening. The trades are way too crazy left and right in terms of who's beating who is beating by who. But St. Clair, if we do look at their actual results, they've got a win over Utah. They're supposed to get that. Kennesaw's kind of fallen off. Cal, again, not a hugely relevant team. They do have the loss to Harrisburg, so that helps establish Harrisburg up here. But they're not really supposed to win that one. If they had, that would be great. We'd be moving them up, but that's about where we've seen St. Clair in the past. UTD fell off over the course of last semester. They kept looking like maybe they'd get it back together. They now have questions of like, hey, some of the players in some of those roles maybe don't make a ton of sense, but they do have the win over ASU, so that gave us a placing for ASU, stopped the meteoric rise there. Bryant Stratton, Toronto, UW, Toronto, and then they do have themselves a loss to Rutgers. So, okay, that's fine. They're going to be down in this tier. They haven't really been stable enough coming out of last semester to really believe that they should be tangling with these teams. If we look at historic UTD obviously has taken down Northwood multiple times. That's how they kept finding themselves in the contenders tier, sometimes the monster tier. But nothing like that this semester, and they certainly don't look like a team that could do that unless Northwood was hard trolling now. Waiting for you guys to prove me wrong. Show me that you can find the magic solution. UST is another newcomer this semester. They've been close to having a very competitive roster in Collegiate for a long time now. They always seem to be one player short, maybe playing in a tournament or in a tier 3 thing with a player that's not at their school yet, etc. But on paper, they have a good roster, and so have they been able to prove on paper? Have they been able to sort of go, okay, we're good. Why are you putting them so high, Temporal, if this is their first season actually competing? They do have a win over Utah, and then we can get into like Oklahoma and Cal, which are definitely meaningful fall-offs. Their only loss so far is to Maryville. They're going to be another one of those teams like UCI, who is really mostly just competing in ABC, so we don't have a ton else to go off of, but this does feel about right. This is where I would have had them, similar to about a month ago as well in this general area here, probably actually on this side of this general area, and nothing I've seen has really changed that. So we are looking at roster strength here, which I don't terribly like to do this late in the season, but when a team is just competing in ABC and they're winning the matches that they're supposed to and, losing the matches that I expect them to, they tend to stay where they were initially placed. Don't worry, we have a lot of teams that did not win the matches they were supposed to. This whole bucket down here is going to be full of teams that did not win the matches they were supposed to. Don't worry. Or I would have expected them to. Overwatch 2 has been fun like that. So then we get on to our next tier. These obviously, we expect these guys, one of them to win. Probably one of these three, but we expect these guys to win. I'm not going to deny Rutgers. I'm going to leave them in here. These guys, on the right day, have upset potential, can go, hey, we can potentially beat teams up in in this tier. Sure, believe it. Dark Horse teams, really unlikely at this point. I know I called it Dark Horse, but really unlikely to see one of the teams in here actually win it all. But seeing them strike above and beat teams in a tier above them, really not terribly surprising here. And we're sort of in a similar place where if you see these teams beat teams in this tier, no terrible surprise. If you see teams beat teams up here, that would be surprising to me. ASU, we sort of already covered them. They've got Angelic there. They do have that win over Converse. They also got a win over Bellevue, who's an old name in Overwatch Collegiate, who has historically been quite good. Bellevue has been on the decline, it looks like. At the very beginning of last semester, it looked like they were going to take it serious. They had quite the interesting hit scan player for scrims. And then as we sort of got through the season, it was like, okay, well, maybe it looks like the players just don't have the same level of interest. Maybe they're playing other FPS games and sort of just coming together and going, okay, well, we're here on partial scholarships to go do this for Overwatch, so let's go try and do it. But if you're not scrimming heavily or if your heart's not in it, you do tend to fall off against teams that are more interested, even if you have a lot of former contenders players on your team. Why did I pivot to Bellevue? I pivoted to Bellevue because ASU beat Bellevue and ASU has a win over Converse there. That said, they did sort of get stopped on their building of momentum with that loss to UTD there. As well as a loss to Rutgers. So we can look at that and say, okay, that makes sense. They did, however, get a win over UF Orange, UCSD. They've made things very interesting here. But who doesn't have a win over UCSD these days? That team is so wildly inconsistent, and that's part of why we're going to put them where we have. Don't worry, we're getting to it. Okay, Can I move? Oh, I did move my head to the right side. Okay. Where's Northeastern? Northeastern, sadly, is it's there. It's just not as high as I'd like. Okay. So Square One Phase Two. No, it was Path to Poverty became Square One because they were forced to rename. Blizzard obviously didn't like that name once they got into their more official Contenders League as opposed to the Open Division, which was the Wild West. They were Path to Poverty in the Wild West, which was a fantastic name, but they had to rebrand sadly when they got moved up. Phase two was sort of the first one, and then had Phase One as its sort of academy team, and Phase One was a terror of Tier Three. The silly comps that you would see out of them that they would then win with against, the top teams were quite a thing. But anyway, back to Collegiate. Illinois Esports surprised everyone this week. They came out and they got two very meaningful wins. They got a win against Bellevue. They also have wins against Miami, Ohio, UCSD, Toronto, CIU, that's Cincinnati, and then they have a loss to Boise. So Illinois Orange coming out, surprising people. People would have, even just a week ago had Toronto ahead of them. That would have been okay, no problem there. People would have had them really outside of the top 20. I, have put them in my top 20 on some power rankings I've done as part of Okra. You guys haven't seen my individual power rankings because I haven't published those as much this semester, but I had them sort of towards the bottom of the top 20, and they have shown that they're definitely in the top 20 based on what we're seeing here. In fact, they're the last of the teams that I would really consider not having embarrassed themselves. That's maybe a little bit mean, but the teams above here, I give all of you guys a thumbs up. You've all done a good job. Some of you have had a little bit of fall off. Some of you have maybe, made yourselves vulnerable when you shouldn't have been to things. Some of you have maybe, had a little bit of this. But you guys, you're mostly winning the matches you're supposed to win. You look like respectable, good collegiate Overwatch teams. Now, teams down in good teams, we need to have a talk because you guys are trading matches left and right, and this team is going to beat this team, which is going to get beat by this team, which is going to get beat by this team no one's ever heard of, which is going to be this, which is like just big old circle of suck going on here. So let's get into it. As we covered, Bellevue, if I'm being fair, hasn't lost any matches. Well, I suppose you could say has lost matches they shouldn't. They lost to ASU there. But Bellevue has sort of been on the decline. Historically good team. Has lots of players that you would recognize from various eras of contenders and the like. You have to imagine that they're still pretty solid, but that they would be down here in good teams as opposed to up here certainly is, a little bit disappointing. But they haven't actually lost wild matches this semester. They actually also don't have any meaningful wins, like any. I will go pretty far down in terms of, hey, can you beat like a top 40 team? Can I count you beating a top 40 team just as a little bit of support? I would have to go worse than that to find teams that Bellevue has beaten. Bellevue, don't get me wrong, I believe they are 7-1 right now. Maybe they're 6-2. So they won matches, but they didn't win matches against anybody. And I mean anybody. They didn't win matches against anyone here. They didn't win matches against teams that I'd go, oh, yep, I've sort of clocked that before, like Longhorn Gaming. I know roughly where Longhorn Gaming sits. Or Hawaii. I know roughly where Hawaii sits. Things like that I can sort of use as part of the clock. No, they're not even winning against those teams. They're winning against worse teams. That said, you know what? They didn't lose any matches that you wouldn't have sort of expected them to have there. They did lose some. I mean, they lost to these two teams, which is why we have them down in here, but they're very unsupported here. And this is certainly much lower than we'd have seen them in previous semesters. But the real controversial one is going to be UCSD. UCSD at the end of last semester, they sort of had the dark horse run where they go, hey, we're going to take out Bellevue, then we're going to take out Rutgers, we're going to make our deep run into the playoffs there as a team that no one had really heard of. The truth is, if you go back to the summer series, we did see they were competing quite well in the summer series. They got some wins that you wouldn't have expected. That's not an ABC one. That was just a third-party tournament, summer tournament. That's when they showed up on my radar, and I went, wait a second, this team could be good. And in the end, they were good. But this team is extremely inconsistent. They seem to especially have a problem where they lose at LAN, including to teams that it should not be possible for them to lose to. Just to give you a perspective of what a problem child UCSD has become, they have a win over Boise, though it's old. They've got wins over Utah, UCLA, Blinn. Then they've got losses to Northwood, Boise. Okay, fine. The loss to Boise is more recent. Then they've got losses to uh, Illinois Orange, fine. Then they have losses to Illinois Orange, fine. And then they have losses to UCLA. They have losses to SCAD. They have losses to UCLA twice. Like, wait, what? There, that doesn't make any. How can you? How can you, as that team, lose down to UCLA over here? Like that? Huh? And then UCLA will lose to a team like UNLV Rebels, which I generally clock as a team in the tier of like a Longhorn Gaming, Rebels. Those are the sorts of teams that might make a 64 team group stage, but will not make a 32 team. Blizzard sometimes does 64 team group stages, and sometimes does 32 team playoffs. And then if they do a 64 team group, it'll generally be 16 team playoffs. Those sorts of teams won't make this and will generally make this, but definitely won't make it through to this. Like, those are like top 40 teams. So you're losing as a team that is able to take down, again, this is last semester, but was able to take down Rutgers, was able to get a win over Boise this semester, that sort of thing. You're also able to lose to UCLA multiple times. You're able to go ahead and do some of this stuff that you just go, huh? You're able to lose to SCAD. And if, we were talking about 2 semesters ago, SCAD, losing to SCAD would be no big deal, and that would be about where you would have expected them to be playing spot-wise, but this SCAD is much weaker. The SCAD that we have this semester is much weaker, and I'll justify that in a second. So UCSD is just all over the place. That's why I have them in my good teams thing. They seem to perform really poorly at LAN, but even factoring out LAN, they seem to have a high degree of variance to them. And if they honestly had a more recent win up here or up here, I would have them up higher in a tier like this, and I'd say, hey, they're just a high variance team. It's not like we haven't seen those before, but they are both high variance and haven't proven a good win of those in really like a month or two at this point, closer to 2. So I just can't put them up here in these, real team category. I don't hate UCSD. I thought it was really cool when I saw them start to find success in the summer series. I thought it was really cool when they took down Bellevue and then Rutgers. I probably would have favored Rutgers there just because, hey, bias, whatever. But I sort of looked at that and went, hey, that was a really cool story. That was really nice. And then they've got some great players over there. I would just like them to lock it down and become a more solid team that can actually play in this tier or this tier consistently, as opposed to everything falls apart. Everything falls apart. Like, it's fun. It's a lot of fun for your power rankings when teams just blow up and lose to teams that they have no business losing to, but it's not predictable. Okay, so that's fine. Then we move on from here. We get to Utah. How do we put Utah next? Well, Utah, they've got the win over the UNLV Rebels, Kentucky Blue, Auburn. Those are sort of nothing teams is the problem. Then they've got losses to St. Thomas, St. Clair, Maryville, Boise, and UCSD. So other than UCSD, those are all, very good teams that they're losing to here, so no big deal. But those wins aren't terribly impressive either. So what do? Well, we're going to put them here for now because they're one of the teams that maybe hasn't embarrassed themselves. They did, graduate one of their better players, but they're a team that sort of hasn't embarrassed themselves, isn't really losing matches that you go, huh, how are you losing that match? And UW, University of Washington, we're going to say something similar for. University of Washington has consistently thought that they're better than they are and been like, why aren't we in the top 20? Why blah, 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 blah. Not realizing that they got the easiest ABC run of all time last semester. It was absolutely wild what their Swiss bracket play looked like. And it hasn't been like this time they have had a harder one and they've had the losses to go with that harder one. So we look at them and they have losses to University of Texas Dallas and Harrisburg, but those are teams that you really wouldn't expect them to beat. So I'm not hugely going to rate those losses against them, but they don't have any meaningful wins either. Their only win is against Ohio Esports. Not Ohio State University, Ohio Esports. And Ohio Esports is probably playing around like top 40, maybe top 30 level right now, but beating a team playing around the top 30 level is not enough to get you, meaningfully into the top 20. Now, are they in the top 20 by default this time? They might be, but I'm kind of just denying top 20 to all of the teams below this line. Yes, Matt, by pure numbers, clearly some of the teams below this line are in the top 20, but I just don't believe it because I don't think any of the teams below this are real, have earned it, whatever you want to call it there. I think the gap is just too much. And now we get over to Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech, okay, well, that's a team that mostly people haven't heard of before. In Overwatch 1, they'd have maybe played at a 4-2 level, never, really been a serious threat to anyone we'd have thought of as a team. Did they get better? Did Overwatch 2 change things so that it can work for them? Or is this just a case of, hey, wildness of everyone is beating everyone and everyone is bad or whatever? Tough to know. But this team has actually sort of, you could argue that this team should be the team over here because we see that they've got a win over UCLA, a win over SLU, a win over New York Ultraviolets, and a loss to Converse. Loss to Converse isn't so bad. Win over the Ultraviolets historically wouldn't have meant very much, but the Ultraviolets got a win over UF Orange, and that becomes important. We'll get to it in a second. So you could argue that these guys should be higher, but they haven't actually beaten any of the teams that we historically would have thought of as good to do it. And I don't just mean historically in Overwatch 1, I mean even like teams that, even a month ago we'd have considered the good teams. So it's really tough for me to go, oh, they should be over here, even if UCSD is giving me arguments to put them over here. And if I put them over here, Utah lost to them, so maybe I'd have to put them over here as well. And Bellevue doesn't have any, and I mean any wins, so maybe I should put them over here, sort of thing. But hey, Georgia Tech, whatever. Then we get to the Ultraviolets, and the Ultraviolets are just creating weirdness in this, to be perfectly honest. They have a win over UF Orange, who we have right here, a win over Penn State, who is, kind of fallen off there, but that's fine. Penn State has been very good in the past. And then we go, okay, fine. They've got a win over the UNLV Rebels, who had a win over UCLA. And then we can also see, sorry, just checking my notes here. We can also see they have a loss to UCI, which no one cares about, and Georgia Tech. So, okay, they go here. Fine, they go here. But wait a second, you're telling me the Ultraviolets are now better than Toronto? Toronto was at or on the border of actually top 20, like they'd sort of proved themselves and were there. But that isn't going to work, and you're about to find why. Ultraviolets are better than SCAD? Well, SCAD's fallen down, but has SCAD fallen down that hard? Ultraviolets are better than Northeastern? Ultraviolets are better than Ohio State? Ultraviolets are better than... Really? This would have been like a flat 4-0 team 2 semesters ago, back in Overwatch 1. So, is that what's going on? Well, we kind of have to treat it that way because, again, when we look at UF Orange has a loss to the New York Ultraviolets and a loss to ASU, but they've got wins over SCAD and Toronto. So that forces Toronto all the way down here because UF Orange got a win to them, but the UF Orange has a loss to the Ultraviolets. So this little loss I'm honestly going to look at and go, this causes question marks to me. I think what we might be looking at is UF Orange just a little too volatile of a team, and UF Orange should probably actually be higher, because I also think Toronto should be higher, but that's not what the results say, and I don't really have a strong enough belief that that's true to actually go ahead and do it. When we get over to Toronto, we can see that there are wins for them against Northeastern, Miami, Ohio, UC Santa Cruz, losses to Boise, University of Texas, Illinois Orange. and UF Orange. So, that forces them sort of back here. SCAD going to make things a little bit confusing for us with wins against Kennesaw, UCSD. Yes, SCAD has a win against UCSD because who doesn't have a win against UCSD? Wild. Um, Penn State, and then that loss to UF Orange. So they're sort of forced back into this spot again behind UF Orange here, even though they have a win against USD. Maybe USD should be over here behind UCLA because UCLA has multiple wins against UCSD, though also a loss against UCSD. UCLA has a win against Northeastern, Oklahoma, losses to Boise, Georgia Tech, the UNLV Rebels, fine, whatever. That's kind of weird, but hey, that's where they are. And then I can continue to go through this just for the sake of completeness. Northeastern has wins against Miami, Ohio, losses to Toronto and UCLA. Miami, Ohio is going to have wins against Ball State and Rowan, losses to Northeastern, Toronto, Illinois Orange. SLU got a win against Ball State over there, as well as Pittsburgh, UC Davis, losses to Georgia Tech, as well as Fisher. Lost to Fisher, of course, means not, or excuse me, Fisher up over there. That, of course, means nothing. But yeah, the real point that we're getting, I suppose I'll finish off. Ball State did beat Ohio State. That's why you're seeing Ohio State down here. If you were following end of last semester, beginning of this semester, you might have said, oh, Ohio State is a much better team. They go up like in this tier maybe, but no, not so much this semester. At least they haven't proven it. They have a very recent loss to Ball State in the Kentucky Land qualifiers, and Ohio State doesn't have any really meaningful wins. They've got Blinn, Cincinnati, losses to Boise, Ball State, whatever. So this is a mess. This is a really fun one, and I'm sure it'll be controversial with people, be that because of what I've done to this good teams tier. This good teams tier has been made a mess. There's not a ton of ways to do it. You could look at some sort of problem children, pain points, whatever you want to call them. I would say UCSD is a problem child. I would say Rutgers is a little bit of a problem child, and I would probably say maybe UF Florida is a bit of a problem child where they're sort of going, we're just going to be swingy. We're just going to be like, hey, we can win. Rutgers maybe, Rutgers isn't like losing matches that they shouldn't sort of thing, but they're probably winning matches that they shouldn't. Do I actually believe Rutgers is ready to take on peak Maryville consistently? No, I don't. So that's what I mean by swingy there. But sometimes they win. So yeah, couple problematic teams making absolute chaos out of the rankings, especially down here. Our rankings are absolutely chaos. I've put them in the order that I think is defendable, that I think is justifiable, but the truth is, tomorrow, if you told me Penn State beat Utah, I'd go, yeah, that makes sense. If you told me that SLU beat the Violets, Ultraviolets, yeah, I'd believe you. If you told me Northeastern beat University of Washington, yeah, I'd believe you. It's chaos down here. And that's just kind of what makes it fun. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you think I got terribly wrong. Let me know why Fisher actually deserves to be up here. Let me know why Harrisburg actually deserves to be up here, or why ISU is better than this, or why Converse needs to fall down here after the loss to ASU. Let me know what you're thinking, or if I left your team off and your team didn't even make the good teams list, and it really should have because you've got some great wins and your losses are pretty respectable, definitely let me know that in the comments as well. Let me go ahead and catch up here on chat. Let's see. Where's Northeastern? We covered. Down here, Northeastern lost to UCLA and Toronto. There's not much I can do. Do I think Northeastern is better than that now and would probably win those matches now? Yeah, but you know what? We lost those matches, so that's where we're going. Okay. TOSU also made us forfeit. TOSU. Which one's TOSU? I saw your guys' record wasn't amazing, so I sort of went, okay, fine, I don't need to put you guys in here, but TOSU. Let me pull that up. Who Santa Cruz was up against. Where's Slug Gaming? Banana Slugs. Finding this on Slug Gaming. There we go. Let's pull them open. Oh, the Ohio State University. Got it. Got it. That's unfortunate. That's actually kind of unusual. Good teams don't usually do that to each other. And while you guys might have fallen out of like, top 25 teams or whatever, and they're not having a particularly great time either right now, lots of teams have fallen out. Again, I sort of refuse to give anyone the title of top 20 team below this line, even though obviously there's less than 20 teams above this line. Usually teams that have a, a record of sorts are pretty good about not forcing other teams that are sort of known teams to forfeit and actually playing the matches unless really nothing can be done. So that's disappointing to hear. You went 0-2 this week? Yeah, I know. I know. It's lots of teams have fallen off. I mean, there was a time when there was a semester when Penn State was top 16, Northeastern was top 16, Slugs were top 16, and that semester, all three of those teams, I believe, Ohio might not have been that semester, but they were close. UF Florida was top 16. These teams were all convincingly top 16, and with a meaningful, defendable gap between them and the teams that would have been top 20 or the teams outside the top 20, where you could expect these teams to win these four, like 9 out of 10 times against defenders trying to challenge even from like 3 spots below, sort of thing. Okay, that's not true now. Now things are in absolute chaos. Throw back to the Slugs top 8. Right, you guys finished top 8. Right. Was it Irvine that you took down for that? I think that was who it was, but that was wild. That was a good one. Mostly for banter. You're not good right now. Got it. Got it. Thoughts on Mizzou? They took a map from Boise and Nace. Mizzou outperforms their SR. I haven't really considered Mizzou relevant. I haven't really considered Mizzou relevant for like a year and a half maybe. But Mizzou, at the very end of Overwatch 1, right before things rolled over to Overwatch 2, by SR should have been like a flat 4K team, but was instead going, no, we're just barely going to miss anything. They were like constantly playing like a 4-3 team using the old SR rating. And hey, that's good. And I don't mean the usual inflation that sort of happens of people going, oh, hey, well, we scrimmed this, blah, blah, blah. Like they actually in tournaments would constantly just sort of go, okay, yes, we're going to. They would play at like a Maryland tier, not a Maryville tier, but like a Maryland tier where I remember Nace, for example, did their final Overwatch 1 tournament, and it was like over 3 different weeks that you could qualify. So, like, each week, the top 4 teams would get pulled out, and they really fought their way to the top of that. They didn't quite make it, if memory serves, but they consistently fought their way to just barely missing. And that was impressive. But I haven't really seen them in Overwatch 2, so I don't think so. I don't think we could. No, I don't think we ever beat Irvine. I think it was UTD. Right, that was the beginning of UTD looking wobbly. You guys started the UTD looking wobbly trend. And then they sort of reestablished themselves by beating Northwood another time or two, but they've only continued to look even more wobbly since then. I forgot about that. Okay. Okay. Can you look at the schedule on out for NEU and see where you think they'll go? I can't actually look at the schedule because they haven't published the matches for next week yet. I can tell you the only schedule I could show you I could show you 2 schedules actually. So I could show you 2 schedules. One schedule I could show you is this, which is the AVGL tournament. And NEU's next match is against Northwood. And I'll let you guys reach your own conclusions on whether you think this team is going to beat this team. I think our dog is cooler than their dog is all I can say there. Yeah. The other thing I could potentially show you schedule wise would be, I suppose, the qualifier opponents. Give me just a second. Yeah, I can pull that one up. The other schedule I could show you would be the Kentucky LAN qualifiers, which I'll pull up in here. Yeah, that's safe. Where we can see we had to inherit St. Thomas's losses here, but sort of two losses because we sort of took their spot after they dropped out. But if we take a look at that, we are up against Intech Engaged and Cincinnati Red. Or Tennessee Tech Engaged and Cincinnati Red. Winnable matches for sure. Cincinnati Red is, reasonable team for sure. So that, is something that I would certainly want the team to pay attention and be ready for. That should be a win. That's very winnable. I gave you guys that. I can't tell you, blah, what ABC futures would look like because those aren't posted yet. Oh, and I was supposed to go like that. There we go. Okay. Is there any other things that people want to cover? We can wrap up here. Okay. That'll do it then. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope wasn't too spicy. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.